Hello, everyone. You can hear me? Yes, good, good. We have a wonderful group here today. I hope you've been well. I'll start out by just sharing a couple of family events in our lives. I guess it was just a week ago that we had two simchas on one Shabbat. Our grandson became bar mitzvah in Sydney, Australia, where they are spending 10 months for fairly obvious reasons, right? And that was exciting. Terry and I participated via Zoom, and I did some of the granddaddy, grandpa things and some of the rabbi things. But they had a wonderful rabbi in Sydney who was with them, and it was great. It was a congregation, Emanu-El in Sydney, which is a Reformed progressive synagogue there, and it went very well. And then later that day, our granddaughter Ariel became engaged. So it was a wonderful Shabbat, wonderful Shabbat. Hope you all have been well. I want to thank Jackie Gruscott again for being with us, top of my screen. She's her daughter Mia is her assistant today. She's home. Thank you, Jackie. And we're going to get started now. Okay. We're going to share a screen today, so you'll be able to read some of the things that we're talking about. So let me show you how we're going to work. I'm going to take you through 15-20 minutes, maybe less, of a review of the book Caste by ISABEL Wilkerson. For those of you who've read it, this is going to be, I hope, a really helpful review of what you've read. For those of you who've not read it, it's going to just bring you right into it, I think, and you'll be able to join us. And we'd like you to chime in for discussion as we move along. You can do that either by the chat room, which Jackie is monitoring, or by raising your hand, and we may see you. You can, and Jackie will unmute you. Chat room is probably the best way. Jackie, is that okay, Jackie? Any other comments on that?
Nope, you covered it all.
Okay, very good, and thank you for being with us. So you'll be able to follow my conversation here initially. We're looking at Caste, the book by ISABEL Wilkerson. The full name is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. About 10-12 years ago, Ms. Wilkerson also wrote a brilliant piece, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the North, the earlier part of the 20th century. ISABEL Wilkerson is the former bureau chief of the New York Times Chicago office, first African-American woman to win Pulitzer Prize in journalism. And what's Netflix? Well, Netflix, I think in the same month that this came out, purchased the movie rights to it. So this may show up as a movie as well. My thanks to Rabbi Howard Goldsmith. I'm utilizing a portion of his study guide, which helped to organize some of the discussion today. So let me begin with the question, what is caste? Caste is a system of social stratification that extends throughout all of a society. It is characterized by inclusion versus exclusion, by hierarchy versus by hierarchy and by purity. And examples of caste can be found in India, Nazi Germany, and the United States, among others. Now, race and caste are not the same. but they coexist and they reinforce one another. Race is visible, right? So race in the United States is the visible agent or operative of caste. It's the primary way that caste functions in the US. Caste itself is an unseen force. You won't see caste, but you'll see race. As Wilkerson puts it, and I think it's very helpful, caste is the bones and race is the skin. Caste is also characterized by dominant versus subservient or subordinate, okay? So caste is the bones of the whole structure, race is the outward skin. So a word about the difference between class and caste. Caste is fixed. It's the fixed nature of caste that distinguishes it from class. Class we're more familiar with, right? Class is an altogether separate measure of one's standing in society. Its class is marked by levels of education, income, and occupation. Much of this flows from socioeconomic status. So Wilkerson suggests, maintains, if you will, that if you can act your way out of it, it's class, not caste. You can act your way out of class, but you can't act your way out of caste. That could be a little debatable. What do you think of that distinction? And is it helpful in understanding caste? Before I ask for any comments, I'm going to go to 8 pillars of caste to help you understand, help us understand a little bit of what that's about. I also want to just tease you a little bit with the question about acting your way out of caste. Did former President Barack Obama act his way out of caste? What caste is Obama in today? We know what class he's in, right? He's in the upper class, former president of the United States, socioeconomic, education, et cetera. We know what class he's in. But where is he in caste? We'll come back to that. Just a little bit of a teaser. The other question, of course, is where are Jews? Where are Jews? Have we moved? We'll come back to that as well. So 8 pillars of caste, if you will. These are the pillars that literally hold up caste. If caste is the bones or a structure, something has to hold them up. There are at least 8 ways that caste is held up. First, by divine will, if you will, biblical references. And you know, in times of slavery, the Bible was also often referred to. So what is this about the biblical story of Ham? Noah had 3 sons. I'm sure you all remember that well. 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Okay? Shem and Japhet did pretty well. Ham ran into problems. Ham saw his father Noah naked after a night of carousing, and Noah cursed him and condemned him to be a slave, if you will. So Shem and Japhet do well. Ham is considered in biblically and beyond the progenitor of the darker class, of those who lived in the Arabian Peninsula, for example, Cushim, as they're called in Hebrew. So there you have it right there. If you're a literalist, the Bible, dark color, black, means cursed and means relegated to the subordinate position. Second pillar is heritability or inheritability. And my parentheses here are just little examples of it, like in Alabama, Mississippi, if you had one drop, as they put it in law, of black blood, you were considered black. It could be 99% white, one drop would do it. That's heritability. And then a third pillar is endogamy. Endogamy is in-group marriage. So miscegenation laws, the laws against interracial marriage, are about endogamy. And keeping the races from intermarrying maintains caste, okay? Fourth would be purity and pollution. Example of that is the segregation of facilities. If a black man used the restroom facilities of a that were designated white, they were polluted. They were considered polluted. I read the obituary of a rather distinguished author who died recently, mentioned that in 1970, when his family lived in White Plains, New York, he went to, he was a guest at a country club, and he jumped into the swimming pool, and immediately all the kids, the white kids, were pulled out by their parents because he had polluted the swimming pool. That's purity and pollution. Occupational hierarchy, part of the pillars. Blacks do one kind of work, whites do a different kind of work, and that was enforced by Jim Crow laws. Then there's dehumanization and stigma, arbitrary punishment and restriction. Think Emmett Till, for example. He's supposed to have looked wrongly at a white woman in a grocery store and ended up being lynched, which is terror and cruelty. And then inherent superiority and inferiority. An example I suggest there could be driving while black. And we know something about that, right? So one more comment, and then I'm going to pause and ask for any comments or questions. I wish we were together where you could just yell and scream. One of the most powerful chapters in Wilkerson's book is comparing slavery and Jim Crow in the American Southland to the Nazi regime. Those of you who've read the book, I know, will never forget the comment, the reaction of Nazi academics and scientists who literally came to the United States in 1934, 35, to study Jim Crow laws in the South. And they were amazed at how severe they were. Is it possible that Americans impose such laws on African Americans? They didn't call them then. And they said, well, we would never consider something as severe as that. That wouldn't go in Germany. Of course, you know where that story went. Let me pause at this moment. Wish I could see you all. Any comments, questions so far? Jackie, anything? Anybody in the chat room here? Any comments?
Yep, Helene Gerstein.
Helene Gersten.
Yep.
Okay, can we bring her in?
Yep. Did you get a little pop-up that says unmute yourself?
I don't see Helene.
There you go.
But maybe do I need to do something?
Nope, she's good.
I got it.
Okay.
I was amazed at how the Black caste is the very, very bottom, and literally called, I believe, the mudstone or the mud slip, meaning whatever was built on top of them, anyone who was a caste above the bottom caste
Right.
knew that or felt that they were stepping on the lowest class, not stepping over, but stepping on them
Right.
each time they were at a building or any place that they that the lowest class helped create. And from that point, I quickly went to George Floyd when the white policeman stepped on his neck,
Right.
and did not even get off,
Yes.
hand in pocket, when he knew that he was dead.
Thank you, Helene, for thank you and no thank you, as for thank you for sharing that. I've thought of that as well, and just that's also, think about dominant, subservient, right? Think of Chauvin and Floyd. Chauvin, the dominant, and Floyd, the subservient, in the most powerful, life-ending way that you can ever imagine. Yeah, thank you for that. Was there another comment? I think I saw Steve Barkan made a comment on chat. Steve, can you come in?
I'm trying to unmute. Okay,
Yes.
so
Okay, Steve.
yeah, where do you place some things like this? Voting restrictions, things that are going on now.
Right.
These things are so apparent. 24-hour drop boxes, no more.
Right.
If you're in Arizona, no water to lines, and on and on and on. Let's look at black neighborhoods and redlining.
Right.
Where do what category do you place that in? Where do you place government decisions on where to build highways?
Right.
Through residential, through black neighborhoods, making it and separating blacks from schools, frankly, in the process. And the role of government loan programs for housing through the decades, which endorsed those kinds of things. So the government played a role. And of course, the type of work, just take a train and look who's working.
Exactly. So, yeah, all very appropriate. All examples of the dominant caste imposing. This is the dominant caste telling the subordinate caste, thou shalt not have water available, I guess unless you bring your own, but it won't be offered to you. And you will stand in line for hours, while we whites will not stand in line for long at all. In terms of the pillars, I think that's inherent superiority and inferiority. I think it's a bit of a, it's a kind of a form that, the driving while black, you're assumed to be guilty, or proven innocent. And I'm come to that in just a moment. Actually, if there's no other comment, I'm going to go on to racial bias in law enforcement. It's related to that, and it's related to housing and so forth. So we pull that up a little higher, Jackie. Racial bias in law enforcement. I think this is, yeah, this is helpful. Their exclusion was used to justify their exclusion. Their degraded station justified their degradation. What does that mean? That means if you exclude a black from education, that justifies their exclusion from education because they are, quote, ignorant. Okay? You exclude from education so that they're they're condemned to ignorance. So clearly they can't move out of that because of all of the pillars, or at best they will have their own segregated, subservient education. Their degraded station justified their degradation. If they were condemned, say on the plantation or in housing, to degraded sanitary facilities, toilets and bathrooms of the like, that means that they will be dirty, unclean, which justifies their not utilizing everybody else's facilities. So the degradation justifies the degradation. The exclusion justifies the exclusion because they are subhuman. You treat them subhuman, they are then seen to be subhuman, and they are kept ignorant. Does this feed the current racial bias within law enforcement? And how can we break the perspective which says crime is high in Black neighborhoods, therefore Black people should face higher scrutiny and punishment? Any thoughts about that? If not, I leave that for you to think about. And we'll have an opportunity for open discussion in a short while as I move through some of these. Save your comments, and I'll keep on moving here. How about discovering someone's caste? Indians have many subtle and not so subtle ways of discovering someone's caste, like asking someone's last name, hometown, occupation of father, etc. Indians, writes Wilkerson, will not rest until they've uncovered the person's rank in the social order. I also think of Israelis. They don't rest till they find out how much you paid for your apartment. That's very, very, very common. And after that, how much you make.
If you have a car.
Later on, Wilkerson writes, dominant caste Americans often show nearly as much curiosity about the ethnic and thus caste origins of their fellow Americans as do people in India. How is this done? What do we ask others, you and I, what do we ask to identify someone's caste? Or what do we say? What other questions might we ask instead that help us to get to know someone without categorizing them? Comment on that. Think about what you and I, what we all do to identify someone's caste or class for that matter. What are the questions we ask? And what feelings do we have? Any comers on that? Any takers on that question? Okay.
Hold on, we have one from Paul and Amy Meshes.
Yeah,
Amy Meshes?
Paul.
Paul.
From Austin. You're still in Austin, or have you come back?
Nope, we're still in Austin.
Oh, okay then. Okay, Paul. Well, wonderful to hear you.
Where you went to school, what section of town you live in,
Yeah.
what shul you grew up in.
Mm-hmm. What kind of car do you drive?
Yeah, that's before.
Where do your
Yep.
children and grandchildren go to school? Are those barriers? When we ask those questions, and I have asked those questions, I've asked those questions. Am I putting up a barrier? Am I creating a ladder here of who's better and who's not? Am I kind of turning down the conversation almost right away? Are there other questions that we could be asking instead of that that would open doors rather than close doors?
That's a very good question.
And what might be such a question? Anyone want to suggest, when you're getting to know somebody, what might be a question? Terry's sitting right next to me here. Do you have some comment?
I like to ask
Yeah.
what you like to do in your spare time.
What do you like to do in your?
What are your hobbies?
Terry's off camera. What do you like to do in your spare time?
What are your hobbies?
What are your hobbies?
What are your
Okay.
interests?
Okay, now that's helpful. But of course, if my hobby is sailing my yacht,
Yeah, I know.
you know where that goes.
Yeah. Or do you like baseball?
You know, or
What sports do you
I love my rolls so much that I just take it out for a ride all the time. So we got to be a little careful there.
Okay, what sports do you like?
Sports, okay. Sports is sports is a little more of a leveler, right? So these are important things to think about as we relate to individuals. Just looking to see, is there so Steve Barkan, why do you do what do you do? Yeah, those of course, those are occupational questions, which are barriers, aren't they? Yeah. Any other, Jackie, do we have any other comments here? We'll go on.
I think you're good to go on.
Okay, that's fine. So Wilkerson writes that she and Tushar is a friend that she meets, an Indian, whom she meets at a conference in London. She went especially flew to a conference in London as she was researching this book and found herself immediately cast, if you will. Incidentally, think of the word cast, C-A-S-T, cast as in a play, cast into a cast, C-A-S-T-E, because she was Black and she was like the only Black at the conference. So was she an attendee or was she part of the cleaning staff, is what some people wanted to know. Anyhow, she met Tushar, the Indian, and we had met at this moment. It was our own Maginot line of equality, standing on different sides of the same quest to understand the forces that had sought to define us, but had failed to, because they both had risen up. Those who sought to define them had failed because she was already an accomplished journalist and Tushar was doing something else. She asks now, I'm asking, how have you defied the ways that others sought to define you, and what makes it easy or hard for you to do that? Think about how you've moved out of the definitions that others, whether it could have been parents, friends, whomever, employers, have tried to define you, and how you've moved out, as opposed to someone like Wilkerson or Tushar from India trying to move out. And when they end up at a conference in London, they're immediately put back in the box, the caste box, if you will. And then we can move on to the Jewish scene. Jews in the American caste system. And Wilkerson writes very thoughtfully about Jews in America and of course, anti-Semitism and Nazi Germany. It was in becoming American that Jews, they became white. And in becoming white, immigrants fused together on the basis not of a shared ethnic culture or language or faith or national origin, but solely on the basis of what they looked like in order to strengthen the dominant caste in the hierarchy. So we Jews may have been very close to the bottom when we came into Ellis Island, right? We may have been at the bottom. Don't think we were quite down at the level of the African American then, but we were right at the line. Barely white, maybe I would say. Then when did Jews become white? In quotes. And what did this mean for our parents and grandparents? And what does it mean for you? When did we become white? Any thoughts on that? Do I have comments? If not, save it. We'll get into it. Okay. Something to think about here regarding caste and class. Have Jews moved up in terms only of class? Clearly, Jews have moved up in class. Have we also moved up in caste? Have we crossed that line? Even though Wilkerson says you don't act your way out of caste, you only act your way up in class. Did Jews act their way somewhat out of caste? We were certainly near the very bottom. I've got some interesting comments here. Let's see if I can bring this down. There's one right above Betty Barkan. I can't read. Can you read that, Jackie, in the chat?
Yeah, this one is from Janice Siegel about the police question.
Thank you, Janice. Okay.
Hold on, let me find Janice too, and she could also unmute as well. I don't know if she wants to read it. A history of the degradation leads for some who were degraded to antagonism to authority and property, and for others learn behavior from the authority. I'm thinking gangs creating hierarchy and enforcing that hierarchy with violence. The police are society's way of enforcing authority and protecting people and property. Those who were degraded became the subjects of that enforcement.
Right. Those who are degraded become the subjects of the enforcement. So you degrade, and then you have to maintain law and order, right? And so the maintaining that law and order is directed primarily at those whom we have degraded in the first place. Isn't that interesting? Degrade, enforce, degraded more in need of enforcement by police. Yeah, thank you, Janice, for sharing that. We can come back to that or any of these subjects as we move on. In terms of Jews, Betty Barkan, getting an education helped Jews become white. Natty Lapidus, it could be through education we moved higher. Both commenting on that. Correct. You all know that education was an extraordinary force for first generation born Jews in America. When our grandparents, great grandparents, whatever level they may be, who immigrated, I don't think any of you had grandparents coming over with Columbus. If you do, let us know. You might have. That's not correct. You easily could have. If you're a Jew by choice, you could easily have had grandparents coming on the Mayflower. Well, not so easily, but you could have it. The importance of education in Jewish history, going back to rabbinic study and Talmud, the role of learning in Jewish life, which has at least a 2,100 year history, if not more. That's been passed down to us. And even though there were some interruptions it was never lost, and it was constantly maintained. And that literally exploded, right? In first and second generation Americans. Our parents or grandparents or great grandparents would do anything to see to it that their children or grandchildren got an education. That was the door out. That just didn't happen because we hit the shores and there was an NYU or a Brooklyn College or something else available. There was a tradition of hundreds and hundreds of years, millennia, that exploded on the American scene. And you can draw a straight line from that emphasis on education to this day, and where Jews are in the socioeconomic sphere, in business and professions and so forth. Not all for sure, and we have plenty of Jews at or near the poverty line, but the rise has been nonetheless meteoric and extraordinary. Contrast that. So what does that mean? We should talk about this in a few moments when we open up. What does that mean in terms of, was there some kind of mobility there available for us? What if we had arrived at Ellis Island with black skin? With or without that tradition of education? Say with the tradition of Talmudic education, unbroken through the centuries, but our skin were black. What would that have meant? Interesting. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
We have one comment in the chat.
Please.
This is from Jean and Carol Rosner. They said, Jews were always, quote, white. We embraced our whiteness to move up in class.
Right. And there, that fits exactly. You couldn't have come, Jean and Carol, more appropriately than to the next comment here, which is listed. Janice Siegel's got a comment here, and then I'll come to that. I heard a Yale-trained social psychologist who has written that his work indicates that behavioral training is the better way to affect police behavior. And yes, Hammerstein's, you've got to be taught before you're 6 or 7 or 8 to hate all the people your relatives hate. South Pacific, right, Janice?
Yes.
Right. Yep. Actually, I quoted those very lines in a chapter that I was just writing the other day. I won't say great minds think alike, but thank you, Janice. Yeah. Now moving on from the Rosner's comment, newcomers learn to vie for the good favor of the dominant class and to distance themselves from the, one second here, from the bottom dwellers, as if everyone were in the grip of an invisible playwright. They learn to conform to the dictates of the ruling caste if they are to prosper in their new land, a shortcut being to contrast themselves with the degraded lowest class, to use them as a historic foil against which to rise in harsh every man for himself economy. Did we Jews do this when we arrived? Did we do it in relationship to Blacks? As new immigrants who had faced 2,000 years of persecution, was there any alternative? What other paths should we have taken? That whole relationship of the Jew to the Black community, so complex, so fraught with pain and achievement, is, I think, captured here. We'll come, if you have a comment, save that if you would. And it has to do with housing as well. If you grew up in Newark, families moved out, Blacks coming in behind you, neighborhoods, etc. Think about that. Just going on a couple more items, and then we'll open up fully. A word about, I can't, of course, avoid the presidential elections of 2016 and 2020. Why some people on the left keep asking, and many of us ask this, why, oh, why were these people voting against their own interests, right? The unemployed and others, and voting against their interests, voting Republican. What they had not considered, the people who asked this, was that those people voting this way were in fact voting their interests. What they were doing is maintaining the caste system as it had always been. That was in their interest. Maintaining the caste system as it was in their interests. And does this explain lower socioeconomic whites voting in such large numbers for Republican policies? Does this give too little credit to the average voter? Obviously, it doesn't explain all votes, but it may explain a good deal. I'm going to skip this next one and just finish up with remembering the past, because I can't. Two quick comments here. We'll probably go a little. We're okay in time. So remembering the past. I know we're dealing with a lot. We're dealing with a 498-page book in 60 minutes. Wilkerson discusses the nostalgia for the Confederacy in the South, the statues and monuments that have been recently removed. What's the best way for a society to remember the ills of its past, especially those that impact the present? There's education, there's museums, there's what Brian Stevenson, who most of us heard, has done with the museum in Montgomery, Alabama. What else? And then Wilkerson describes the Holocaust memorials in Germany, including the stumbling stones. How many of you have seen the stumbling stones in Germany? Those are stones marking where victims of the Holocaust had lived. It's very powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Terry and I saw them in Berlin about 6 years ago. So where are the stumbling stones for the slaves? Stumbling stones for the slaves. So memorial markers for slaves. Brian Stevenson's project is starting to do that. But he's got most of that in Montgomery. In some spots, there are notes of where lynchings took place, but that's very, very rare. Where's the punishment for the Confederacy is asked, and is there an echo of that forgiveness of the Confederacy in those who say we should move on from January 6th of this year? This and forgiveness, let's move on. Interesting to think about. Germany erected monuments to the victims and paid restitution to them. The US put up monuments to the rebels and paid restitution to the rebels rather than to their victims. To what extent do we incorporate slavery and Jim Crow into our own identity as whites, as Americans? And what about as Jews? And what might that look like? And finally, a word about empathy. It's a wonderful, memorable story in Wilkerson's book about a plumber. Those of you who have read the book will remember it. Those who haven't, you have something to look forward to. Briefly, Wilkerson, whose husband died just a short while ago, I think perhaps before she wrote the book, had to deal with a bunch of the issues in her home she wasn't used to. She called a plumber. The plumber came, and she felt immediately that when the plumber saw that she was Black, that his relationship to her was anything but helpful. And then she started to, talk about her loss. And the plumber responded about his loss, I think, of a parent. And they both kind of bonded for a little bit about loss. And this difficult conversation with the plumber became empathetic and changed. And so she writes, radical empathy. Radical empathy is not about you and what you think you would do in a situation you've never been in and perhaps never will. It's the kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it. I'll repeat that. It's the kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it. I think of Martin Buber and I and Thou here. And you know when that happens. You know when you relate to somebody who relates to you on the basis of the spirit that you're feeling and the pain or the joy that you might be experiencing. It's a wow. It's a wow. It requires profound humility. It means that the goal is not to love your neighbor as yourself, but instead to love your neighbor as she is. And I wonder what you make of this as well. The latter part out of the quotes is not Wilkerson, but it comes from other thoughts. So I know we've done a lot there. There's enough here. Each of these topics could be an hour's conversation, and I hope I haven't thrown too much at you. But I was just so impacted by this book that I felt I needed to bring all of the major themes. There are many other themes, major and minor, that are not, we didn't have time for. I would love to open this up to as much conversation as we can have. So Jackie, what's our best way here? Do that.
So I've allowed participants to be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And can I see everybody here?
Yep.
Yeah, if I go to gallery, here we go. I'm in gallery now. Okay, hi, everybody. So you can unmute yourself. We appreciate your staying muted. Unless you're speaking, but I really welcome your responses to anything that we've talked about, or anything that relates to what we've talked about.
Rabbi, I remember I went to school in Florida in the early 50s. We went down by train, overnight train. When I got off the train, I went to get a drink of water, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder. I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "It's colored only." I said to him, "It's water." But the real kicker was I was fishing on a pier right at the school, and at the next pier over was a young black kid who worked at the school. A car pulls up, 4 guys get out, and they push him in the lake. Now, one of the guys I was fishing with lived in Florida, and I said, "Let's go help this kid." He said, "Don't go over there until these guys leave, because if they come back, they're going to come back with shotguns, and you're not going to be here tomorrow."
Probably true. Probably true.
Isn't that awful?
So Terry and I had an opposite experience. We were,
Oh, yes.
I had my first high holiday pulpit as a student was in New Iberia, Louisiana. And we flew to New Orleans and took a train to New Iberia. And some of you have heard me say this, and my dark complexion was darker than ever. And when we sat down in the train car, the conductor he told us that our correct seat was the car behind us. We thought we were simply in the wrong reserved seat.
Right. We're so innocent.
But we sat down, and we're we're kids. We're back barely out of the teens. And about 5 or 10 minutes, we realized that everybody in the car was black. And he had, I think he took us as an interracial couple. And we stayed there. We were okay. But it was an experience of being moved to another caste. Yeah.
Rabbi, did anybody ever ask you where your horns are?
Yes, I think I've had that at least once. Yes. And many people have related that. Yeah. Other comments, friends?
I see Jean Rosner's hand raised.
Jean and then Natty. And anybody else? Anybody else raised? I don't see everybody, but I'm gonna just, you see anybody else? Okay, and you go, if you're not recognized, go to chat as well. Okay. I just see my cousin from Washington here. I have to welcome my cousin George Kroloff, who comes into this from time to time. So glad to see you, George. What a joy Zoom is. What a joy Zoom is.
Well,
yeah,
Chuck,
Jean-
can I interrupt?
Okay.
Because you bring up some very interesting questions, but there's the question of not doing something consciously, or not understanding what you're doing and what you're saying when you put somebody into a caste,
Right.
and you don't mean to be putting them into a caste.
Right.
I will give you one example. It happened to be in New Jersey. I was working at the Washington Post at the time, and Mrs. Graham, Catherine Graham, was giving a speech. And for some reason, I don't remember why, it was at a country club, and I was attending the speech with a fellow that I worked with who was African American. And we joked as we were walking down the hall about being in this country club.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jewish
he
boy,
and I were,
Jewish boy and African American boy, right? Yeah. Okay.
that's correct.
Mhm.
And he and I are very close. I made a joke saying,
I think I lost you, George. Sorry.
no, I said, no, did you, am I back?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I said, if it wasn't for Mrs. Graham, I said, you wouldn't be here. And I was trying to make a joke. And it stopped. And he said, no, you wouldn't be here either.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't mean it
Right.
as putting him into a cast.
Right. But,
I just
yeah.
meant it as a wise guy joke.
Right. Wise guy
But these
joke.
kinds of things, these kinds of things happen all the time.
Yeah. So
And it becomes
Ain't funny.
complex.
the difference between the conscious and the unconscious comment is very, very important. Thank you, George, and thank you for being with us. Jean, and then Natty, and anybody, who else do we have? Anybody else?
Yes, Rabbi, this is Harvey.
No.
Howard, okay, let me go to, I've got a little list here, and I love lists. So Howard, I see you there. Well, hold on for a moment. Jean Rosner, Jean or Carol, whoever.
Rabbi, I see a very significant point to the plumber story that you
Yes.
related, and that is that radical empathy as described by Wilkerson could only happen now. I don't think it could have happened, certainly not during slavery, because empathy requires that you see another person as a human being. I'm not even sure that it could have happened in the 50s or the 60s at a time when the Jim Crow laws were starting to disappear. But now we're starting to, I would hope, as a society, see each other as human beings, which is, I think, the first step in coming out of that caste system.
Gene, that's a very, very interesting comment. Hadn't thought about it in quite that way. Are we at a different place today? Is radical empathy a possibility today, whereas it was rarely, if at all, a possibility before? Has there been some kind of a structural change or a process? Maybe I don't want to suggest a beginning, a middle, and an end, but more of a process. You know, a progressive movement where that is now more possible. I think that's something for us really to think about, because most of us grew up at a time when that was extremely difficult, if not impossible. I mean, even, you know, even 50, 60 years ago, right? Yeah. And 70, 80 years ago, we've got a few people around here who can relate to that. I mean, when I was growing up as or as a teenager, could I engage in radical empathy of that sort? Is it more possible today? Some of the kids, some of the teenagers that I talk to today, some of your children or grandchildren, some of them are capable of that, even having some of that experience that we could not have. So I think it's really something to think about, something worth talking about, you know, generationally, with your own children and grandchildren. Like I'm going to. Is radical empathy possible for them across racial lines, whereas it was pretty much impossible before? Thank you for that very much. Natty, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'll just tell a short story about my husband, Bob, when he was stationed in the South during with the Army, and he was in charge of a kitchen. And one of the soldiers from the South was with him, and they were looking at the stock of things, and they had brought things in. It was a Jewish holiday, and they brought some food in for the Jewish soldiers, and there were bottles of borscht on the shelf. And the Southern soldier looked at my husband and said, "What is that?" And Bob said, "It's borscht. It's a beet soup." And he said, "Oh no, that's blood." And he was serious.
Oh, gee.
That's blood.
He was serious.
Mhm. Okay.
That's a story.
Okay. And Natty, from that you learn, take it one more sentence. One more sentence. From that you learn.
That there are a lot of people in this country that, just like today, people think that through QAnon, that there are Satan. And it's very hard to change people who have radical views.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I've got Howard, Terry. No, what? Yeah. Howard, Terry, and I think Janice. So you go a few minutes past our 12:30 for some of you, if you can. Your tuna fish will wait for you, I'm sure. Okay, Howard.
Jump into integrated schools is a big plus because they don't think anything is different.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Rabbi, what's the name of the book?
Caste.
Yes.
Caste?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Who? Did Barbara? Did you have a comment?
Barbara Kroloff. Yes. She's not muted.
You unmute. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. Rabbi,
Yeah.
no mention was made of the true American in this country, the Native Americans. Talking about class and caste, they've been treated so unfairly that it's hard to believe. And just to go a little bit further, we have friends who are Native American and Jewish.
Yes, that's a very important problem. My recollection is that Wilkerson makes, I know she does not refer to Native Americans much at all. I think she may have one or two references to Native Americans, but if very brief, if at all. Yeah, very important point. Very, very, very important point. Terry, come back to Terry. Okay. Janice, I believe.
Yeah. I think it's very important to understand all the mechanisms of caste, but I was reflecting, I don't think that we should totally self-flagellate. And I think of my own participation in the civil rights movement in the 60s and all the people I saw who were participating. And in my own case, I viewed the Black community as akin to Jews in Nazi Germany. I was raised in a household that very much told us about Nazi Germany and how Jews were completely degraded and killed. And I saw Black people as similarly people who just for no reason at all were being killed, were being segregated, all of that. So I don't think it's necessarily new. It's just that it might be on a broader basis. I know my own children, they who are young men now, they're in their 30s, you know, they grew up in a more integrated world.
Right.
Not so integrated, but more integrated in Westfield, New Jersey. And they truly have friends who are Black, who come to our house or go to their houses now. And so I don't think we have to totally self-flagellate. I think we have to understand all this, but I don't think we have to say that we lack empathy. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. I think that's very helpful, Janice. Jews have been in the forefront of the civil rights movement for decades and decades. And just one example is the tragic death of Schwerner,
Right. Goodman.
Cheney, and
Goodman.
And Goodman. Yeah. But there really has been a progression. So no, we don't need to flagellate. But there's been a progression. Some of our children and grandchildren, you know, are date people of another color.
Right.
And it's happening today with far less comment and far less eyebrows being raised. If that were happening in the 60s and 70s, Janice, even with the civil rights involvement that we had, it's like you talked about nonstop.
Right.
And it's not, so there's a progression, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. So I think we're nearing the end. Terry, did you want to make a comment?
There's no special. What I was thinking about, of course, we're all thinking about our own experience. And I grew up in the South, as Chuck did too, and the segregated South. And I went north to college, as he did. And when we did that, when I did that, I was sort of breaking out of the system that I was used to. First of all, I was into a non-segregated area. And I remember the shock of going to a very fine Ivy League college and seeing that I was with people of color. I was stunned, but I sort of integrated it, but that was a blow. But I got used to it, and that was all part of our education. And also coming out of the segregated South and being Jewish, I remember I went to a private school too, and my parents thought that was really, they were stepping out of their class by sending me there, but they
So
didn't care.
there was a lot. So there was a lot of class desire for class movement, and you know that relates to what we spoke about earlier, is Jews trying to climb, and in climbing we were climbing over or around, and that was complicated. It was complicated. Any final word before we wrap?
Rabbi, when I was an intern in the emergency room, I met a young Black woman there. She was wearing a Jewish star. And I said, why are you wearing that? As a decoration? She said, no, we are a big Jewish community and we feel we're one of the original tribes of Israel.
So this is a place to conclude, and that is Jews of color. And I believe, I know that our temple, certainly led by Rabbi President and Rabbi Appel, and particularly by our student Rabbi Becky J, have been spending a good deal of time, a lot of bandwidth, and properly so, as has been the URJ as well. It's become a focus for the URJ, Union for Reform Judaism. Jews of color, and we have spoken about this before. Remember, a couple of years ago, I commented at one of our lunch and learns that 12 to 15% of the Jews of America are Jews of color. When I said it, it was hard for me to believe I was even saying it, and many of you questioned it. And I even heard from I wrote it somewhere, and I heard from a sociologist from Chicago who said couldn't be true because I don't see them. I don't see them in the synagogues, but it is true. It is true, and that's a really important part of who we are, and understanding our relationship to race. That many fellow Jews are Jews of color, and what that means day to day in terms of our synagogues and our Jewish community. Think about that in terms of the issues that Wilkerson has raised. So just as we wrap up, I'm just so grateful to Isabel Wilkerson for writing this book, and to several people who have suggested that I read it. I think about it a lot. And in my interaction with people of color, I try to ask myself, am I relating to this person as someone of a lower caste? It provides a framework for me to ask those questions and to engage in self-examination. And it helps me also understand the broader picture, of course, from the George Floyd and death and everything else. And when Derek Chauvin was in that iconic picture that you all saw, ushered out of the courtroom and convicted of having killed a Black man, was that, what did that say about caste? What does that say about the present? We don't know what it says about the future. We really don't. But it connects to so much of what Wilkerson was writing about. And Steve Barkan, finally, as Steve often does, recommends that we see Charles Blow's column today, so timely right now. I must admit that I haven't read Charles Blow today, but I will. And Susan Pepper asked, does Wilkerson have any messages for the future about caste in America? really good questions, Susan. I think it's probably going to be for another day. But the best way to end is to end on great questions, right? So think about Susan's question, messages for the future of caste in America. And we'll read Blow's column. Thank you all for being with us. And if there are themes that were raised here today that you would like to explore further, send me an email. RAVCAK, Rav, C-A-K, at AOL.com. And perhaps we'll discuss some of these subjects a little bit further, including what about the future of caste in America? I think that's might be a good question for the future. Let me know if you're interested in that. Thank you all for being with us. Be well and safe. And let me also wish you, in case you didn't know it, Lag BaOmer is coming on Thursday and Friday. And that's a day to be out in nature. And we have some plans for that as well. So enjoy Lag BaOmer. And if you haven't had a haircut recently, that's the day to get a haircut, because this is when 3-year-old boys in traditional and ultra-Orthodox communities, including Israel, get their first haircut on Lag BaOmer. So if you haven't had one in a year or two, think about it for Thursday, Friday. Be well, be safe. The best to all.
Same to you.
Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
If you want to stay for a minute, you can say hello if you want to. Feel free. And it's good to see you all.
And you.